Today's discussion is the media go electronic, the radio and TV revolutions. It is impossible to overemphasize the transformative impact of the early electronic media. From the time of the first U.S. radio broadcasts in the early 1920s, radio allowed listeners to hear news in real time. That immediacy marked a drastic change from the standard, delayed method of receiving news, which was by reading the morning and evening editions of newspapers, plus the occasional extra edition published when important breaking news warranted it. Radio also altered the relationship between politicians, particularly presidents, and their constituents, because it enabled listeners to hear the voices of their elected leaders. Television further revolutionized that relationship by making it possible for people to see their leaders, though initially only in black and white. Radio was the first electronic medium that brought people into direct contact with their leaders. Beginning in the 1920s, radios became a fixture in American living rooms, and families who could not afford a radio of their own would often spend evenings at the homes of friends or neighbors who could. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the first politician to realize the value of radio as a device for political communication and to exploit that value. As governor of New York from 1928 to 1932, Roosevelt faced a Republican state legislature hostile to many of his liberal social welfare programs. To overcome the opposition, Roosevelt used radio addresses to appeal directly to his constituents, who would then lobby the legislators for his policies. Indeed, after some of Roosevelt's radio addresses, legislative offices were flooded with letters from constituents asking lawmakers to support a particular policy. By the time Roosevelt became president in 1933, he had grasped the importance of radio as a tool for communicating directly with the people. FDR often began his radio addresses to the country, the fireside chats, with the greeting, "Good evening, friends," highlighting the personal relationship he wished to cultivate between himself and his listeners. You can download many of Roosevelt's fireside chats in MP3 format from the Vincent Voice Library at Michigan State University. Through the folksy fireside chats, Americans learned about presidential initiatives on the banking crisis, New Deal social welfare programs, the declaration of war on Japan after the nation's attack on Pearl Harbor, and the progress of U.S. forces during World War II. In all, Roosevelt had 30 fireside chats with Americans over his 12 years as president. During the golden age of radio, the period from the early 1920s through the early 1960s, radio was the dominant form of electronic entertainment. Radio programming, including a wide array of shows, from newscasts to serial dramas to comedies to variety shows. Although political and news radio programming remained popular during the 1950s and 60s, radio generally took a back seat to television during that era. Radio began to emerge from the shadows of television in the 1970s and 80s. Those decades brought a renaissance of sorts for radio, as the medium saw tremendous growth in talk radio, a format featuring conversations and interviews about topics of interest, along with call-ins from listeners. As many AM station owners switched to an all-talk format in those years, music programming migrated to the FM band. In 1987, the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission, repealed the Fairness Doctrine, which had required stations to provide equal time to all sides regarding important public issues and equal access to airtime to all candidates for public office. If you didn't get that, please rewind. Since the law's repeal, partisan radio programming has grown dramatically. Today, listeners tend to tune in to radio hosts who share, many say reinforce, their opinions, and they interact with them through call-in opportunities. Talk radio features numerous well-known personalities. I'm going to go from top to bottom. Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Rachel Maddow. These shows are also available via the internet and through podcasts, thus potentially reaching a significantly expanded number of listeners. This figure shows the rise in listenership for talk radio programs since 1995 and 2002. Daily leadership of such programs nearly doubled between 1995 and 2002, increasing from 12% to 22% in that time. Since 2002, although daily listenership has dropped, the proportion of people who listen several times a week has held steady at 9%. Talk radio was one of the first forums that allowed media consumers to talk back to the host. At its best, talk radio allows for a natural, real-time exchange of information between the host and the audience. At its worst, it has given rise to loud, angry rants and arguments. Scholars widely agree that talk radio programs promote citizen engagement in the form of civic discourse. Recall from earlier chapters that civic discourse means the sharing of viewpoints and the articulation of personal positions on public issues, along with the information gathered and reflected thinking that must accompany that expression. This information sharing is fundamental to a civic society. That is, without informed and shared opinions, people cannot be responsible, politically engaged citizens. The appeal of talk radio, particularly as broadcast via the internet, mirrors the allure of internet blogs. The message of both media have become highly personal and emotional, targeted to a narrow segment of the public. Conservative radio commentators tend to draw an audience dominated by middle-aged conservative males, while this much smaller liberal market segment tends to draw the coveted younger audience. Although radio predates television, TV nonetheless has been the centerpiece of U.S. home entertainment for a long time. Television began to make a mark on the American scene in the 1940s when small TV sets, their screens flecked with static snowflakes, hit the market. Today, the images we view are crystal clear as high-definition, big-screen TVs increasingly dominate households. Hundreds of channels compete for audience share, ending the previous dominance of the three major networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. With all the new competition, network television is rapidly losing viewers. Along with announcing in July 2004 that cable television enjoyed 52% of the primetime TV viewing audience, Nielsen Media Research, publisher of the famous Nielsen ratings for television shows, reported that network television had just 44%, with public television having a 4% market share. In addition, total viewership for the television networks had fallen by 41% between 1977 and 2003, from 51 million viewers to 30 million viewers. This figure shows the continuation of those changes. Viewership of nightly network news broadcasts on ABC, CBS, and NBC plummeted between 1996 and 2008. In 1996, a large majority of Americans watched a nighttime network news broadcast. By 2008, only 34% did, and the number who never watched grew to 23%. Compare those figures with the data for the network's cable news counterparts, where daily viewership has increased by 17% in those same years. Among the other categories of TV news, mornings such as Good Morning America and The Today Show, public television news broadcasts, and local news shows, viewership has essentially stagnated. As cable news channels such as CNN and Fox News have increased their viewing audience, it is no wonder the word broadcasting has spawned the term narrowcasting, the practice of aiming political media content at specific segments of the public, divided accordingly to political ideology, party affiliation, or economic interests. This winnowing of audiences has led to media segmentation, the breaking down of the media in general according to the specific audiences they target. Examples of segmented media include Black Entertainment Television, or BET, the U.S.-based Spanish-language television network Telemundo, and the Lifestyle Network, which includes the Food Network and HGTV. Through media segmentation, advertisers can hone their advertising to the tastes of their targeted market. Being telegenic, or looking good on TV, has become almost mandatory today for serious political candidates. It is unlikely that President William Howard Taft, 1909 to 1913, who weighed over 300 pounds, would ever have been elected if he had been forced to appear on television. Nor would Abraham Lincoln, whose handlers would have marched him straight to a cosmetic surgeon to have the giant mole on his cheek removed. Richard Nixon might have won the presidency in 1960 had it not been for his nervous demeanor and the 5 o'clock shadow on his face that made him look sinister in the first ever televised presidential candidate debates that year. His opponent, the handsome, relaxed, and articulate John F. Kennedy, won the visual debate hands down, even though in hindsight most analysts agree that Nixon won that debate on its verbal merits.